We basically believe that in the next 10 years, the topic of screen time and focus will be just as big as the topic of diet. It'll be something that everybody knows and everybody talks about. Opal is about attention sovereignty. It's about the fact that you decide where your attention goes, not the algorithm. And I think that many people care about that so much that they actually want to share it with their loved ones, with their friends. It is possible, and we are doing it. We will align the technology we use with human well-being. It's just a design problem. It's not a fundamental problem. And I think the more people care about this, the more products like Opal will exist, and the more we're going to create a brighter future.
Welcome to Subversive, a podcast dedicated to sharing stories from the best consumer subscription apps in the world. We'll bring you lessons for how to grow your consumer subscription business, including insights and inflection points that led to exponential growth from leaders at category-defining companies and innovative startups. Let's get into the show. My guest today is Kenneth Schlenker, the founder and CEO of Opal, which has rapidly grown into the world's #1 screen time app since launching in January 2020. In this episode, I talked to Kenneth about why apps like Opal that help people focus are more important now than ever, about why getting early access to Apple's Screen Time API in 2022 was such a critical inflection point for the company, and about the specific product and growth tactics that Opal used to grow to $10 million in ARR with a team of just 11 people. All right, welcome, Kenneth, to the Subversive podcast. I'm excited to have you on today to talk about your screen time tracking app and focus app called Opal, which is certainly my favorite screen tracking app, and my wife as well. We're both avid users of the product. Would love to just start with a little bit on your background and what inspired you to start this company in 2020.
Yeah, thank you very much for the kind words, and thank you for having me in this great podcast. At some point in the last 20 years, technology industry lost its way. We forgot what matters. And so what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to make sure that we can realign computers with human well-being. And so this is kind of a big mission. The way we got started was a very practical approach, which is like, what can we do to make a difference in everyday lives of people? They're using their phones most of the day. Initially, we started building an app that was a VPN app back in 2020 that eventually became the app that you know today with access to Screen Time API. It's a long journey, and we got to build an app that makes a difference in so many people's lives. So we're very excited about that.
Well, one thing I'll say right off the bat, I feel like there's the canonical Jeff Weiner post around how to write a great vision and mission and strategy statement that came out of LinkedIn. But I find that a lot of companies do that in a very hand-wavy way. And so it's funny to think about an app that on its surface seems as simple as Opal, but with a vision that's much more expansive around better aligning computers and technology with human needs. And I couldn't agree more. I really do feel like technology, you could argue, has done as much harm as good, or at least in certain categories it has over the last decade or so. And so I'm excited to talk more about that today. But before we get into Opal and its mission, let's talk a little bit more about your background. So you started your career at Google,
I did,
and then you spent over a decade as a serial entrepreneur, and you've started a number of other companies. And so what do you like so much about starting companies, and what are a few of the other companies that you have started over the years?
Yeah, so I did start my career at Google, left in 2012, started a marketplace, completely different mobile, which was a fine arts and collectibles marketplace, which sold in 2017. After that, went to building a variety of products, SaaS products, actually. I tried to learn and how to actually build, market, and sell software products at a larger scale. Built Opal in 2020, so this is kind of the third business. And I think, linking back to what you were saying before about the mission, there's something which actually stayed with me throughout the entire time, because when I was at Google, I was basically building addictive products, like many people, working in large tech companies. It was pretty early on. I had that insight that people actually need help to be able to navigate the tools they're using. And so I basically built the business model for Opal. At that time, started as one of the ideas that I had for businesses. And it took more than 10 years to mature and to become a business. And so when I did go around and want to build a business like Opal, it started with a mission statement. It started with a manifesto. The initial product that I had in mind was very different from what it is today. It was originally an operating system. The company is called Opal OS, Opal operating system, because I wanted to fork Android, build a completely new operating system. Tried that, found that it wasn't actually very viable, very hard to do, very hard to find out what you actually need to do to make a successful product in that space. No MVP, no testing, and then eventually got around to finding specific use case that we could build for on iPhone with a first product that then turned into a second product into the product that today. But I think that one thing that was constant was the statement of what I think about the market, what I think about the tech industry at large, and what I'd like to do in terms of contribution in that space.
Yeah, so let's dig in there. And you talked about your time at Google, and you've mentioned that when you were there, you had, quote, a firsthand view into the architecture of addiction. So you alluded to that earlier, but could you describe maybe what you saw then, and then how that did influence your decision to start Opal?
Yeah, I was part of a very small research team, and one of the projects that this team was working on, for example, is can you predict the unemployment rate using Google search queries? And that was, that seems like a trivial thing today, but back then was kind of a big deal. And the answer is yes, you can do it very well. Things like, can you predict that the user is a pregnant woman when they're using only search query data? And so pretty early on, I understood that companies have very large amount of data, have a lot of power to be able to predict behavior and also influence behavior. And I think a lot of people, have been kind of at that time inside those large companies, got that awareness. It was a smaller issue back then, but now that today, every single person in the world has a smartphone, every single person in the world has social media. People, the average age for smartphone ownership is just under 12 years old now in the US. And going down year after year, these small problems became really big problems. And so now we have to ask the bigger questions.
Did you say that I assume you meant the average starting age for owning a smartphone is now 12 years old in the US?
Correct. Yes.
Wow.
The average starting age is just under 12. And it goes, the age goes down year after year. I'm sure but it's not atypical for, 8-year-old kids to have most of their friends that actually have a smartphone today in many places. And so that causes new challenges. Yeah. And it's not the kids, by the way. It's all the way through, our ages, all the way through, retirement. It's a topic where, everybody's affected in different ways. With, of course, different varieties of people. Some people, have attention deficit disorders and they're affected in a particular way. Some people have, pre-existing health conditions of other kinds. People that are, much younger are affected in different ways. And so the thing is, I view it a little bit like diet, where, there's not a one size fit all. There's some things that are good, some things that are not so good. What's really important is understanding what you need and understanding what's good and what's bad for you and making those decisions. And so for this, you need education, you need to learn things, and you also need a tool. And that's what we're trying to provide with the app.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And when we were preparing for this episode, I mentioned that I have 2 daughters, an 8 and a 6-year-old. And so they are, the oldest one is right at that age, 8 years old, where her friends are starting to get smartphones, or at the very least, they've got the smart watches now that are a little bit more toned down, but they're going to be wired up very soon. And so it's very top of mind for me and my wife as parents. We also talked about the anxious generation, Jonathan Haidt's book, and the impact that social networking has had on young brains over the last 20 years. So let's use that as a segue into this broader question, which is, why do you think screen time apps and focus apps are more important now than ever? And I'll also dovetail that with, you started this company in January 2020, just before the COVID pandemic. And I'm curious how that has, in some ways, sort of accelerated a lot of the trends that were already existing, but that now have made it even easier to sort of fall into some of these addictive habits.
Yeah, I think more and more people are caring about this topic. It's showing up in so many different ways through the books you mentioned, through media, through just general public attention. And I think people in tech and many people listening to this podcast are pretty attuned to it. I think it's getting into the mainstream. It's still early, but back when we started in 2020, this was probably a nascent trend. Definitely COVID, accelerated things, but like many things, we're seeing that there's a lot of these trends actually were accelerated by COVID, but definitely not caused by COVID. And if you look for example, at some of the more worrying signs of the topic, like performance in reasoning tests of younger people, they start declining in around the time of, generally around all rich countries, around the time of the introduction and of the iPhone, actually, and this kind of strange correlation there. But it's accelerated with COVID. It's continuing beyond COVID. So in many ways, it did light the match. It did accelerate things, but it's a deeper trend beyond that. We started just 2 months before lockdown. Typical, I guess, startup story of that time. I wanted to open an office in New York, and then ended up building a remote company throughout Europe and the US for 2.5 years, and now returned back to kind of a more hybrid approach. But yeah, I think certainly the topic keeps growing. More and more people are caring about this. And why are screen time apps important today? So, the market of screen time essentially really began, there were a few apps before then, but really began with the introduction of screen time settings on the iPhone in 2018, and Google followed suit pretty shortly after, Google Wellbeing. Those settings basically educate people on the fact that, hey, you can actually measure the time that you're spending on different apps. That's a new idea for many people. But they don't really work for most people, and they certainly didn't work for me. And so we're pretty excited to have been able to work with Apple and essentially get access to an API that allows us, and now many other apps, to innovate on top of screen time and to build new kinds of features. I think personally, there's two things that screen time settings are missing. The first thing is, if you want to change people's behavior on a topic that's so important, you can't make them feel bad, only make them feel bad. It has to be motivating. It has to be, enhance positive behavior change. And the second thing is, there's no one size fit all. Like, people are very different. Some people view screen time as a more of sleep thing. So basically being able to go to sleep earlier. For some people, it's really about work. For others, they need a really restrictive approach. And for other people, they want a simple nudge, something light. And so it's really difficult to use settings for that that are kind of out of the box. And so what we do is we try to provide a tool that can be used by everybody, with different kind of settings, with different kind of ways in. And also we really focus a lot on how to build motivation. Biggest inspirations of other apps in that space, like Duolingo and many others, that have, basically taken something that is really hard, like learning a language, and that very few people will do because it requires, like, getting a book, getting a tutor, learning something every day, and making it really incredibly easy by, building the motivation, and doing something that people like to do. And so really that's what we're trying to do here with Opal.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's a good segue from the sort of big picture mission and philosophy of the company into the brass tacks and the strategies and tactics that have made you so successful and propelled you to believe the largest, or certainly one of the largest, screen time apps in the world at this point. And a lot of this started around 2022, or at least that's my understanding, when Apple released their screen time API. You mentioned that prior to that, you spent a couple of years sort of wandering in the desert trying to find product market fit. It started as an operating system. You tried a bunch of different approaches. Talk me through why the launch of Apple's Screen Time API in 2022 was so important, and why it served as an inflection point for Opal.
So I think it comes down to the fact that when a user installs a new app and gets a Apple branded permission screen that says, hey, you can just hit this button and give access to screen time settings, that comes a lot of trust, and it makes it much easier for more people to do. Before then, we had our own kind of tech stack that required installing a VPN and all these complicated things that are not something that most people would do. And so overnight, it made it legit, it made it easy, and safe. And of course, Apple being Apple, they made it in a way that is really conscious of privacy, for example, and performance. And so overnight, it made it really, really helpful. The other thing it did is it helped us build a relationship on the editorial side. And so obviously being able to be featured was also something that helped. I think that beyond that, it's just the timing, right? Like, I think 2022 was when more people cared about this topic than ever, and there's a lot more people looking for for these kind of apps. And also, we were able to, we did definitely like spend 2 years in the dark, but we acquired a lot of learnings during that time. And so the product that we relaunched at that time, late 2022, was really blending all of these learnings together in a single product. So a bit of these three things together.
Got it. And can you, just to sort of put a finer point on it, talk me through what some of the legacy versions of screen time tracking apps looked like prior to that API release, and then how you were able to fundamentally transform the category based off of some of the functionality that the API made available for the first time.
So before that, you could try to guess the specific screen time of the user and display some UI that showed an approximation of how much time you were spending on apps. That, without getting into the technical complexity, it was, let's say, a workaround, and it wasn't very precise. And the other thing is you couldn't really properly block an app or display these kind of overlay screens that you have when you open Opal. So today, you use Opal and you're going to say, during my work time, for example, I'm going to try not to go on social media. And then the next time you open Instagram or TikTok while you're working, you're going to get instead this kind of overlay screen that we control that will remind you of why you made that commitment, and you can't access the app. So that's only possible with Screen Time API. Before then, you had to find all kinds of other workarounds that didn't really work as well. So, Overnight made it a lot easier to use, a lot more effective, because A, you could get access to data that is precise and same data that you have on settings, and B, you could actually now put some overlays, block screens, specific places with your own message. And so I think these are the two kind of pillars. There are other things, but these are the two main ones.
When did you start to see the impact show up in your growth metrics on some of these changes? Like you talked about how before a lot of this was manual, and those subtle differences make a big difference, right? You talked about how, okay, if I wanted to learn a language before, I needed to hire a tutor or go purchase a book or spend a lot of money on Rosetta Stone. But Duolingo comes along and they make it so much easier, so much more accessible. Now you have a free language tutor in your pocket at all times that you can pick up, and in 5 or 10 minute increments, you can learn a language. The equivalent here is you can just automate all of the little tricks you need to stay motivated about tracking your screen time and avoiding apps that might be addictive, like social media. When did you start to see this show up in your metrics, and how did it affect your growth trajectory from 2022 up until this point?
In the first year, we really focused on finding people that are willing to pay for the product. And so the reason this framing is important is we had a pretty hard paywall, and we were doing performance marketing from the beginning to kind of figure out not only who are the people willing to pay, what are they willing to pay for, and then make sure we can build that. And so in that process, you really have to make sure that the initial experience works really well, the onboarding works really well up to the paywall, and people, convince people to sign up for a trial. Overnight, when the API got introduced, that first part was much easier. We got much higher onboarding completion rates and trial start rates for sure. And what we discovered was that, of course, people willing to pay. So two things. One, people willing to pay really wanted to use Opal for productivity first. I would say productivity first and well-being second. It's much easier, in my experience, to sell productivity, especially when you ask people to pay, rather than just well-being. Productivity is direct ROI. I'm going to save time, and as a matter of fact, we can now measure that we're saving people over an hour and 20 minutes every single day once they start using the app, because we see their screen time before and after. So that's a really high ROI product in that way. And so we discovered that was the main use case, and we discovered that the types of people that were willing to pay for the product, and so that allowed us to build better feature. So typically, people Opal is mostly has been in the beginning, people that are ambitious, people want to be owners of their own lives, really want to do the best at work, but also make sure that they can actually have a life outside of work. We're able to learn these things and build a better product, build better features for them. And beyond that, in the last 2 years now, we've really made a much more accessible freemium product. So now there's a lot of the product that's completely free. There's not a very aggressive paywall in the onboarding. And we've uncovered and unlocked other segments. And the biggest one is by far is students, with high school students, and now college students that don't necessarily convert into paying customers, but have massive needs. When you're a college student today, it's very difficult to relearn how to, read a book, finish an exam paper, or be able to go to sleep on time. And so we covered a massive other segments with this approach.
So I want to drill down into your growth strategy, because in some ways it's the opposite of how I think a lot of the most successful consumer subscription apps from the last generation came up. You look at Tinder or Duolingo or Strava, right? They all started with freemium products, highly organic driven growth strategies, some combination of word of mouth and or SEO. And then eventually, once they got to scale, they introduced a more aggressive paywall, they increased their prices, and they were able to funnel all of that incremental revenue back into paid acquisition. You went the opposite route, and I'm seeing more and more consumer subscription apps, especially among smaller teams, do this really successfully, which is we're going to start with a hard paywall from day one. We're going to focus on finding the highest intent, highest willing to pay users. We're going to use Meta and other paid ad channels to find those users really efficiently. And we're going to be really disciplined around metrics like D8 ROAS, which you've talked about on other podcasts, to make sure that we are doing this cost efficiently and sustainably. So why did you take that approach? And then at what point did you decide, okay, we've made it to the point now where we're going to move beyond paid and we're going to experiment with some more organic acquisition strategies?
I have huge respect for Duolingo as a company, as an app, and what they've done is so absolutely incredible. As a matter of fact, I remember distinctly I met Severin Hacker. He wouldn't mind me telling that was one of the co-founders of Duolingo, right at the time when I was actually making that transition from aggressive monetization strategy to kind of open up freemium. And Severin's opinion was like, open up, make a freemium first, figure out how to pay later, was extremely successful with Duolingo. And I did listen a lot, actually, in our strategy. But I do think also we recognize that when you start an app in the early 2010s, it's a very different thing than starting an app in 2020 or 2025 in a few different ways. Organic is much harder. And the second thing is the willingness to pay is much higher. And we've seen this because, of course, like many more people are paying for subscriptions. The overall market for non-gaming subscriptions is increasing every year, as you talk about in your podcast very well. And so that means that there's more people willing to try a product and pay for it early on. And so a combination of two things means that there's a new playbook, I think, which is a bit different that you're talking about, where you can actually start paid, learn a lot, learn about who's your core product, core user. But what I think that not a lot of companies are doing is moving on to that second step, which was the step we're in now, which is kind of opening up. Because I do think if you can have a very successful business of a few $1 million annual recurring revenue, maybe 10, maybe 20, with the approach of heavily monetizing. But if you truly want to create a product that has a mission and change the world, you're going to need to move beyond that. And I think it's possible to do it. And this is what we're doing now.
And so I think that's so insightful, specifically this point around, okay, you started a company in 2010, the App Store across both Apple and Android is still in its early days. There are far fewer apps out there, which means organic discovery through things like App Store search is much easier. But also it's just a lot more novel. So people were talking about new mobile apps more. There wasn't nearly as much competition. Fast forward to 2020, and that equation had completely flipped. The app stores have gotten so crowded. Ariel McYelly at App Figures often talks about how there are now more than 100,000. I think it's approaching 200,000 consumer subscription apps across both app stores. I think the amount of novelty has just gone away. And so people aren't organically talking about or searching for new mobile apps as much as they used to be, or if they are, they're just running into all sorts of competitors. But then at the same time, there's been this other trend, which is as people have gotten more and more accustomed to paying a subscription for software, which I think people don't appreciate the degree to which 15 years ago, that didn't even exist. And 10 years ago, it was still very uncomfortable for a lot of consumers, but now it's just the norm. People pay for Netflix, they pay for Spotify, they pay for Duolingo. And so the equation has completely flipped. As you have looked at a paid ad first growth strategy versus now moving beyond that into organic growth, what are the specific growth metrics that you and your team have focused on? And how have some of those growth metrics changed and evolved with the transition from paid first to organic?
Yeah, I mean, paid first, I think, is relatively simple and pretty well documented. Basically, what matters most is day eight's, return on marketing spend. If you have a 7-day free trial, depending on how long your trial is. But essentially, what you want to do is you want to figure out a way to acquire customers. That's your marketing spend, where you can pay yourself back within a short amount of time. And that's the most important metric, because that's going to mean you're going to want to, not only do better marketing, whatever it is, performance or others, but just do better marketing, like iterate on the messages and how you talk about your product, the stories, and what features you talk about. And then you're going to want to iterate a lot on the onboarding, how you convince people to start a trial. For example, if you have a trial first approach, and then making sure you can deliver on that promise and actually have a product that people keep up until they pay and don't get a refund. So that's really, I think, the first part of like the focus, and really we've been ruthlessly focused on this metric for the first phase of the company. That was pretty much the only thing that really mattered, and we were able to scale pretty successfully from from zero to going to $5-7 million annual recurring revenue with this kind of sole focus, annual recurring revenue. And then beyond that, moving into, you have to make a complete turn, which is what we did, which is not easy. But right now, our priority focus is actually daily active users, and we have our own definition of active, but that's aligned to our mission. But really, it's how many people are using the product. And we still do performance marketing. We also do other kinds of marketing. We have organic content channels. We have a lot of referrals coming through the app with some social features and different kind of referral mechanics. But what we want to do is want to make sure that as many people in the world can benefit from the product that we're building. And so really focused on daily actives. The marketing team is tracking, of course, the return on investment as well. Basically, we have a notion of what kind of content we want to put out in the world and the level of quality, and we track views, and then we track mentions as well, which is how many people talk about the app as we're building. We basically believe that in the next 10 years, the topic of screen time and focus will be just as big as the topic of diet. It'll be something that everybody knows and everybody talks about. And what we want to do is want to make sure that Opal is the brand and the company that is synonymous with this topic. And so tracking mentions a way to make sure that we're part of the conversation. And so we look at how many press articles talk about us, how many people talk about us on social media and other other outlets.
You mentioned that as your strategy has evolved from pure play paid acquisition into more organic, obviously word of mouth and referrals has been a big part of that. Are there any other organic channels that have been particularly important for Opal?
So definitely, like, word of mouth is by far the largest. So in here, it's primarily making sure the product is great and people can talk about it, and then also building some features that can enhance that. We have our own organic channels. We have a pretty different approach, like something that I think is interesting. We recently just launched it's actually a brand account, but it's not a brand account. It's not the Opal TikTok account. It's called Olivia Unplugged, and it's basically a creator that we've hired as part of the team. Is full-time here. That's really building a media, basically talking about the topics, education around the topics of focus, but also like what to do instead of scrolling. And so, how to build a hobbies, how to make friends, and many things like that, which has been super successful. And so it's Olivia Unplugged, powered by Opal, and we're replicating that strategy as well because we think there's a lot of potential there. And then we're starting to do press. So we're starting to talk more to press. I had the chance of publishing an op-ed recently on the back of a outdoor campaign that we did, which we also tried recently. It's actually still up in New York. We bought a billboard. So we're trying all these different things and starting to invest in more channels as we grow.
Very cool. And I guess a related question is, So Apple's continuing to evolve iOS and other platforms to make screen time more top of mind and to help people preserve their focus in an increasingly busy world. And as that happens, I'm sure there are going to be other competitors that flood into the space. So how do you think about maintaining your first mover advantage in this space and continue to evolve ahead of that competition?
Yeah, I think so. By the way, I'm very excited to see more people enter the market. I think the potential of this market is huge, and I see, it's a billion user product potential. At least, there's 5 billion people in the world that have a smartphone every day and use it every day. So there's plenty of space to build and compete and build great things. I really think that it's a great way to learn, also, and basically distribute the R&D budget with different companies experimenting with new things. But how do we keep the first mover advantage? I think there's a few things. We try new things. We build new kind of features. We listen to the customers, users, to discover what they might need. I'll give you an example. We just launched quietly a sleep product inside Opal. It's a new feature. It's a new tab that you may or may not seen if you use the app already. You can check it out. And basically, it's a product that allows you to gradually make sure that you go to sleep when you're supposed to, and then B, when you wake up, that you gradually waking up. What we found is that it's very hard to fully separate from your phone, and it's oftentimes it's people's alarm clock, and it's also one of the main causes of people going to sleep later than they should. And so we're trying to ease people in, on the way to sleep and the way after. Also building content in their sleep stories and soundscapes that we're really excited about in the app. And so this kind of thing is a process of discovery that we just found a lot of people were using the app Opal for sleep. And we didn't have a feature for that. So we actually are building in that direction. And I think that every company is different. Like all the competitors will build in different ways. But really it comes down to, for us, talking to users and figuring out what they need, and experimenting with new ways to serve their needs.
This brings us all the way back to where we started the conversation, which is the importance of having a clear and aspirational mission that defines the company, as opposed to starting with a single product and then just retrofitting your mission to that product. Because if you were to set out and just say, we're a screen tracking app, a screen time app, then that could lead you to a much more narrow vision and mission. But if your mission is aligning technology with human needs, then okay, the first hero product is screen time tracking and increasing focus. But now you can get into sleep, you can get into better habits. There's all sorts of places you can go with this. Also say, I'm somebody who, I have an Oura Ring. I use it every day. I've got my Rise app that I use to track my sleep debt. And I think sleep is one of those categories that is just in the very early stages of the innovation that needs to happen to help people, because our world has gotten so complex and so stressful that I think it's becoming a pandemic. People just aren't sleeping enough, especially in the modern world, which is a little bit ironic. So that's really exciting that you guys are finding all of these adjacent opportunities to expand into. And I guess that segues into one of the last topics that I wanted to cover today, which is just how Opal has managed to achieve such a significant amount of success in a short period of time with a relatively small team, and whether you think you can continue that or whether the team gets much larger from here. So to put a couple stats out there, you started the company in 2020. It really took off in 2022 with Apple Screen Time API. We talked about that. You publicly stated that earlier this year you reached $10 million in ARR, and that was with a team of just 11 people, although I know you expanded quite a bit even since then. So what have been the biggest advantages and disadvantages of staying so lean, and do you see that changing over the coming years?
Staying lean keeps you focused. It helped us tremendously in the early days to have a small team. It also means that you really want to make sure that you're hiring people in the team that are super entrepreneurial, really believe in the mission, and can do many different kind of things. What this has helped us do is create solid foundations as well to be able to expand what we're doing today. And so we're lucky, actually. I think out of the 11 people, we've kept almost everybody in the team today, and a lot of these people now are hired people in there to work with them. And so the benefit of that is you have people who have done it themselves, and now know exactly what to look for to grow the team. And so it's been tremendously helpful. Also, we didn't raise a ton of money, which is also the other aspect. We just also were not in a position to hire so many more people. That gave us an advantage, I think, in terms of not having to grow too fast too soon. We did grow pretty fast, but we still are at a scale where we can actually do things like we're doing today, which is discover new use cases and build out a new product. So I think overall, it's been very helpful. Right now, we are actually 24 people today, so we grew quite a bit this year. That's allowing us to do more things. So we launched an Android app, for example, this summer. We're building new use cases like sleep. We also introduced a product for schools, which is a new nascent product as well, that is helping enforce phone policies in schools. So that's also been possible by new people in the team. But with the same approach, I try to look for people who are really passionate about the mission, and again, like very important there, and people who typically are pretty entrepreneurial. Every one of our engineers so far that joined the team has their own app on the store, and something I really insist on, meaning they've actually like built their own app and published it. And I think it makes a very different kind of mindset in terms of engineering. And yeah, I think that's it's been a part of the fabric of what we are as a company.
Yeah, I love that. I'm a big believer in that. I also think that AI is going to make it easier than ever for very small teams, even independent developers, to build very large companies. I think Sam Altman recently said that the first solo founder billion-dollar company is coming, which sounds crazy, but in a world of AI, it's possible to do so much more with so much less. And so I'm a big believer in this, especially for the consumer subscription model, because there just aren't that many companies that do reach billion-dollar plus valuations, which means that raising a ton of venture capital and hiring a ton of people on day one is very dangerous because it can sort of paint you into a corner. One of the other things you've talked about is just this emphasis on the mission, which we've talked about, but also delivering value to users over growth at all costs. And that we've talked about the growth levers that you've used, but it also requires a lot of attention to the craft of your core product itself. So can you talk a little bit more about what are some of the key features that has made Opal stand out in a category that has already gotten fairly crowded with screen time? And then also how gamification has played into your success, because having used your product, there are some fun and delightful ways that Opal makes something as mundane as screen tracking seem a lot more interesting.
Yeah, I think that's something we really care about as a team, and thing you've pointed out. It's always like a trade-off between craft and speed. I think for us, like we try to make sure that we know which parts of the app we really want to spend some efforts and time on to really make the experience feel special. I mean, one of the most loved, I think, features in the app is the milestone unlock experience. And so basically, when you're using the app, you kind of get rewarded with these beautiful, we call them milestones. They're basically like Opal gems. They're beautiful. And to get them, you have to crack it open, basically crack the earth, unearth these gems, and that experience is something that people really appreciate, and comes with a lot of craft. Whole other story of how we made this, but it's been pretty great to build. And then I think in terms of gamification, there's a notion of consistency. So we have streaks in the app, which are a mechanic that actually works to keep people motivated. That's for sure. And we have a leaderboard, which is being used by some people really religiously, I would say, where you can actually compare yourself in terms of screen time to other people, other your friends. And schools, for example, this is really popular. Also because like no one has any idea what good screen time is and what's bad screen time. And so it actually gives you a point of reference to have a conversation with people about. And so, yeah, these are two of the interesting mechanics. And we have a simple referral program as well inside the app where we basically reward you for inviting people, and the other people get rewarded as well. And with gradual rewards, if you invite more than 100 friends, you're going to get a special gift actually for us that I can't disclose, but it's special. It's great. So check it out. And if you invite 5 friends, you get a free year of Opal Pro. They're actually 5 friends that actually successfully create an account. So these mechanics actually really help to bring in people. It's also something that people want to share and talk about to their friends usually.
Yeah, I think that last point is really key, which is there are a lot of digital products that people are at the very least indifferent about sharing, and at worst are sort of embarrassed to share. Because let's take a gaming app, for example. Like, I play chess, I play all sorts of other games on my mobile device, and I love them, and they're part of my life. But it's not necessarily something I'm going to say, hey, you got to play this game because it's going to be good for your life. Whereas Duolingo has talked about how selling something that helps people learn and improve themselves as a human being is something people naturally want to do. And I can see with Opal the same being true. So that makes a lot of sense. And then you guys have been very clever with how you've structured your referral program and how you've built shareable artifacts and gamification into the app in ways that augment that.
It's an important mission. I think a lot of people that use the product actually share that mission, that Opal is about attention sovereignty. It's about the fact that you decide where your attention goes, not the algorithm. And I think that many people care about that so much that they actually want to share it with their loved ones, with their friends. And so that's been a powerful driver of the app and of sharing and of the gamification inside the app.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's get into where you see Opal going over the next 5 years. What's your long-term vision for the product, and how does AI factor into that vision?
We use screens for absolutely everything. We use technology for everything from the first time we wake up until sleep, and oftentimes actually including while we sleep. And so it touches every aspect of people's lives. And the way I see it is, we started with a pretty specific use case, which is more productivity focused. People who are, more like you and I would say, focused on productivity. People working in tech and others. We expanded to students. Beyond that, there's a much larger segment of people who I would say like lifestyle, who they're conscious of the fact that this is an important topic and they want to change, but they're not necessarily ready to change their habits right away. They're not necessarily ready to make a big commitment. And so what we want to do is want to make sure that we can actually serve these people, making Opal as easy to use as possible, without any strong commitments. So, nudging you, reminding you at the right time, giving you really compelling information and content about the topic. That's going to be a big part. We talked about sleep, which is also an adjacent topic, a really large one. We can do a lot there. And beyond that, so this is really about capturing and serving the a very large market. We think there's probably 1 billion people in there on every single platform for iOS, Android, Mac, Windows, and all desktop and mobile platforms and wearables. And beyond that, once we've built a product that can serve all these people and have demonstrable, proven impacts on people's well-being and on people's productivity, there will also be companies that'll pay for this. There'll be schools, like I mentioned, insurance companies that will be they'll be paying for the product as well. And so the way we see it is, this is kind of longer term vision, is really to build a product that can be a billion user product that can really help align the computers, the technology that these people are using with their well-being in a way that is extremely easy and motivating for most people.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's a great note to end on, because it reflects a lot of the other points you've made throughout the episode around the mission of the company and how you started small with an initial product use case that was laser focused on screen time and focus, but have since expanded that to other areas that just promote human wellness and better relationships with our technology. So with that, let's get to our lightning round. And I always like to start with the same question here, which is, what is the best part about working at Opal, and what's one thing you would change?
The best part about working at Opal is the mission. One thing I would change, I want to reach out to more people. I want to make Opal useful for a lot more people. Sometimes feels like we are um, talking to people who have like high discipline and high motivation to change, but there's so many more people out there that need help that we're not yet serving, and that's really what I want to go to next.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And it's always fun to ask this question to founders because it sort of puts you on the hot seat, right? It's like, well, if there's something you don't like or that could be better, then you're the founder. Why not just go do it? But I love how both sides of that coin were related, right? You've been so consistent about saying how important the mission of Opal is to you, and that mission is to make people's lives better by improving their relationship to technology. And the other side of that is, but we're only touching so many people, and there are a billion plus people out there who could benefit from this product. And so, how do we reach more of them?
It's both very motivating and very frustrating. Like there, I walk down the street in any city in the world. I go to any cafe, to any subway, to any bus stop, to any place, any school, and I think everybody needs the products that I'm building. But it's just so hard to do. It's very, very hard to do, and it takes time. And we're doing this step by step.
Yeah. Well, and it takes patience. And I think you've built the company in a way that reflects a recognition that as much as you want to do everything for everyone right away, the only way to get there is build it brick by brick. And that does require patience. So next question is, what's the app you have the hardest time blocking on your own phone? What's your guilty pleasure? Like, what do you have a hard time saying no to?
I would say it actually changed. Today, it's former Twitter X, definitely. I feel like this has become one of the most powerful feed apps for myself. So yeah, that I would say X.
Yeah, for me, it's always been. I was a gamer growing up. I played all sorts of strategy games, and then I got into Hearthstone, which is one of the top e-games in the world. And I had Albert Chang on the podcast. He's the chief growth officer at chess.com. I play chess.com every day. And, within reason, that's fine. That's healthy. It's a hobby. And I would argue it makes me sharper and I learn things from it. But it's all about moderation. And when it gets
Right.
out of control, it can be counterproductive. I've never been somebody who has much trouble with social media. I spend almost no time on social media. But it feels like gaming and social media, those are probably two of the most common answers people get.
Yep.
What's your favorite hobby, and how has Opal given you more time back to enjoy it? And I guess I should say hobby that is not digital, that's in the real world.
Music, I play the guitar and listening to music intentionally. And this is definitely something that I feel is essential for me to find balance every day. So basically kind of pulls me in a totally different direction than what I'm doing on screens. And so, Opal has helped a lot find more time for this.
Yeah. Yeah. I think those real world hobbies are so important. For me, it's getting outside. So I live in Boulder, Colorado. My wife and I both love the outdoors, snowboarder, hiker, mountain biker. And you're right. It just changes your perspective, right? And as tech professionals, it can be so easy to get very narrowly focused on your work. But I think things that get you out in the real world really provide a healthy balance.
Essential. And by the way, I think there needs to be a reframing for so many people, and that's not really, I think, heard enough in our culture, which is when you're going outside, when you're practicing whatever an instrument, when you're doing something that is, feeding in many ways your soul, you are already and also investing in your work, because what you're doing is you're making yourself you're much stronger to be able to go back and actually produce and create and do the things that you need to do at work. And so I think this reframing is kind of essential. I think there's a lot of guilt that comes with taking time off, being away from the feed in many ways of work and Slack message and others. But if you reframe it and you see it as an investment, then I think it can help a lot of people.
Yeah, I love that characterization. It's a force multiplier. And sure, you could work in an incremental 5 or 10 or 15 hours in a week. But if you are burnt out and you've lost all creativity and inspiration, then how much incremental productivity you're actually getting from that?
Yeah.
And in addition to ruining your health. So I love that. As a serial entrepreneur, you founded many companies. What single piece of advice would you give to aspiring startup founders that will most improve their odds of success?
Charge people early. That's I think a typical kind of first founder mistake in my mind, especially today in all the things we discussed. If you most people, if you build a product that serves a real purpose, you can find a way for people to pay for the product. It also like aligns things a lot in your company, in your mission. You really are serving the people that are paying you. It makes things more easy.
Yeah, I love that. And we'll keep that one short because I love how contrarian that is. It's becoming less and less contrarian. But yeah, I mean, it's the ultimate test, right? And if people aren't willing to pay you, then you don't have a business. Last one, how do you think AI will change the need for screen time apps over the next 2 to 3 years?
What AI is already doing, and the first thing it's doing is making social media apps in particular a lot stronger and a lot more addictive, actually. And what's likely to happen is that there are new apps that will emerge, and some of them have already, that will make social media feel like broccoli in comparison, and it's going to be so much better, so much more personalized, so much more dopamine with every hit. And so what this means is there's going to be a lot more need for this. And by the way, I think it's not necessarily screen time. It might also be audio or other kind of form factors. But ultimately, it's about how do you make sure the technology you're using is aligned with what you need. And you got to figure out, if you're using products that are not really, aligned with making this happen, we're going to have the same issues. And so I think that this is what's likely to happen. The problem is just beginning. On the other side, I think there's plenty of amazing tools that are coming out of this, and personally use these tools in an incredible way. We just need to learn how to use them and make sure they're not using us. So that's really what needs to happen.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And you hear more and more of these horror stories of people going off the deep end with ChatGPT or other AI tools and creating AI friends or romantic partners that they become so infatuated with that they like opt out of the real world entirely. And we're only just in the early innings of this, right? It's just going to get harder and harder and more addictive and more alluring. And so it brings us all the way back to the mission. The mission of Opal is to improve the relationship humans have with their technology. And in a world where technology is accelerating so fast with AI, I can't imagine that mission ever being more important than it is now. This has been such a pleasure, Kenneth. Thanks for coming on. I knew you had a great product because I've used it myself for a while now, but it was fun to learn more about your mission and the impact that Opal is trying to have on the world. Any final thoughts you want to leave the audience with before we wrap up?
Just an optimistic one. I think. Thanks so much, by the way, for the invite. It is possible, and we are doing it. We will align the technology we use with human well-being. It's just a design problem. It's not a fundamental problem. And I think the more people care about this, the more products like Opal will exist, and the more we're going to create a brighter future. And so I really believe in that. And let's make it happen.
I believe in it too. And I'm glad that you and your team are working on it. Thanks again, Kenneth.
Appreciate it. Thank you.